I wouldn't place blame in individuals for having cravings, certainly. That chocolate bar that you're craving because you're feeling stressed is not something that's actually going to make you happier. Problem I see with children being exposed to sugar so often is that
Welcome back to the How to Fitness podcast with me, Kate Lyman.
And me, Michael Ujoa.
And we have a guest today. We're really excited. Michael and I have been kind of just itching all morning to start recording. We're talking about cravings today. If you're a listener to our podcast, you know typically what we do is we kind of do a deep dive into a topic and we talk about all of the research and findings around a specific topic, and we go a little deeper than, you know, what we can share on social media with like 60 seconds of a reel. So today we're going to talk about cravings, and if you've listened to our podcast before, you know we talk a lot about dispelling the myth that changes in our nutrition and fitness come down to willpower, which we know is not true. So we're going to talk about cravings and how there's so much more than that. So we're joined by Dr. Raphael Cuomo, author of Crave, to break down what's happening in the body when cravings hit, why they show up around food, and how our biology is flexible enough to heal and rewire. We're going to understand today more about cravings as not as a failure, but as information. And Dr. Cuomo emailed me, when was this, like a month or two ago? You sent me an email saying, hey, I wrote a book. You should listen, you should read it and review it. And I am a big reader. I read it. And there is not a person around me in real life who hasn't heard me recommend your book, Dr. Cuomo. Like, anyone who has had a conversation with me in the last month knows that I've read this book, knows that I recommend it. And so I'm really excited to explore some of the topics you talk about in your book in the episode today.
I'm super happy to hear that, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're really excited. When researching for this episode as well, Dr. Cuomo, I can't kind of understate this, how impressed we are with how much you have done by how old you are. I don't want that to sound kind of insulting. I'm thoroughly impressed. Like, we were expecting you to be a kind of a much older guy who's kind of hardened by doing research for many, many years, but you're still this kind of young person who's done so much with your career. And it's just so motivating and inspiring for both me and Kate. How do you do it?
Yeah, not to be weird, but we literally looked up your birthday.
Yeah, we did.
To see how old you were. Because we're like, he looks so young in his photo. He has to be like 50 to be able to have done all of this.
Well, I mean, I've been very fortunate over the course of my career to have access to a lot of data, and to learn a lot of the techniques required to analyze those data and just develop a lot of curiosities around these questions, learn how to ask the appropriate question. And so when I get a desire to want to answer a question, I'm very fortunate. I have a lot of data sources available to me, made available to me through my university and the hospital and other kinds of public health bodies as well. I can just go dive in and start analyzing, and then figure out what's going on here, what are the right answers to these questions, and then put it out there into the literature. I've had very good mentors over the course of the years to teach me how kind of academia works, from a very practical standpoint. So you can not only have this scientific curiosity about what's the answer to this question, what does the data say, but also the technical techniques to get the answer, and then the practical skills to write it up and put it through journals and then get it out there. And I've had other mentors as well, teach me kind of how to talk to the media and stuff to get more awareness of the findings, which is a little unique in what I do because my research crosses over from some very basic science as well as to the applied medical sciences and then broadly to public health. So I've had my foot in kind of a lot of different areas, and have been very fortunate over the years with the support I've had, both from data standpoints and also from other researchers that have worked with me.
And incredibly humble as well. So there we go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's just kind of jump straight into your expertise then, if that's okay. So within your book, you write how cravings aren't moral failings, they are feedback. Like, can you just tell us what cravings actually are, first of all, and what they're trying to tell us?
Absolutely. So craving is an involuntary wanting, essentially. So in our daily lives, we want things, right? So we want things reflectively sometimes. For example, I want my kids to grow up to be happy and successful, right? That is a logical, reflective, I'm thinking about it. That's something that I would like to happen. I want that to happen, but that's not a craving, right? A craving is a lot wanting like that, but it's involuntary. So it is something that we that occurs to us through a cue signal. That could be an interoceptive signal, so something that occurs in our body. So stress hormones may spike, or maybe a certain amount of time since you've eaten, or a certain time of the day. It could be really anything that is both either internal or external. And that cue signal triggers a wanting, an involuntary wanting in what's called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. And this is a pathway that is pretty deep in the brain. So you have this cue signal, whatever it is, it triggers the mesolimbic dopamine pathway for you to want something involuntarily. And before your evolutionarily developed part of the brain has a chance to kick in and counteract that by thinking, by saying, hey, I don't actually want, that's actually not something I want, you are already wanting it. So this is again an involuntary wanting, and oftentimes it's very unwelcome.
What is the thing that switches it from a wanting to a craving then? Can it be like a really simple change, or can you just like delve into that like a little bit deeper? Is that okay?
Yeah, so it is so the craving is itself the wanting. The transition is from the cue signal to
Hmm.
the craving. So again, the cue signal can be anything that is internal, for example.
Hmm.
So it can be, for example, that I'm feeling slightly stressed, and as a result of that, now all of a sudden I want a chocolate bar. So that is something that is internal. You have cortisol rise, and then as a result, you have that cue trigger the mesolimbic dopamine pathway to get you something to resolve that stress. It can be something external, right? It can be simply 4 p.m. and as a result of it being 4 p.m. in the course of my day, a certain amount of time I've been awake, I feel that cue signal triggers the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, and as a result of that being triggered, I want a chocolate bar or caffeine or whatever it is. These are learned and they're reinforced over time. So the more that we reinforce them, the harder, the more powerful it becomes and the harder they become to break.
Okay, so our culture and environment heavily dictates this then, or can heavily influence this, yeah?
Definitely,
Hmm.
yes. There's something to be said for, our giving into it, right? But at the same time, it's hard to, I wouldn't place blame in individuals for having cravings, certainly, because we live in an environment not, manufactured for the natural state of the human body. We live in an environment that is very manufactured for a convenience. And things like the time it takes to resolve a craving reinforce it further. We're surrounded all the time by these external cues that may trigger the craving, and then very conveniently, we're able to very quickly resolve those cravings. And due to the rapidity of which we're able to resolve those cravings, we reinforce them further. And so it's really no wonder that as adults, over the course of our childhood, over the course of early adulthood, we have developed extremely strong cravings that are hard to break, and we normalize them. We don't think that they're unusual at all. And that can lead to repetitive behaviors, which are maladaptive, which lead to diseases like cancer, as I write about in the book.
So when you're talking about the cue routine reward loop that I think we talk about a lot with our clients, I work with nutrition clients and Michael as well with nutrition and training clients. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role of anticipation in cravings? Because you wrote about this in your book.
Yes, absolutely. So it is important to distinguish between wanting a reward, and which is the anticipatory thing that we're talking about, and also the experience of pleasure. Okay, so oftentimes what we want due to the craving is not something that is going to give us pleasure. That's a common misconception. What we want can be something we want in order to feel relief. Usually it's relief. So that chocolate bar that you're craving because you're feeling stressed is not something that's actually going to make you happier. It's something that you want because it is going to resolve the craving and relieve you from the craving. And usually there is something internal going on there. It can be stress, it can be the time of day, it can be really anything at all. But that cue is the thing that you're trying to resolve. And so that's what's going on with dopamine in general. With dopamine in general and this pathway and this whole sequence of events, what's going on is you are wanting something, you're anticipating it, and as a result, you have more dopamine. Pleasure comes from things like opioid signaling, which is a completely different set of pathways, a completely different set of neurochemistry that's going on there. So there's a lot of confusion around dopamine as a pleasure hormone, which, it has its role in pleasure, but really is more strongly linked to wanting something, right? You want something out there in the distance, and dopamine is what starts firing to get you to go after it. When you get it, if it's something pleasurable, then the opioids fire.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. And I think we jumped over this, and I think maybe because Michael and I read your book and listened to some podcasts, we have this in our mind, but I want to talk about it with listeners. Tell us how cravings play a role in cancer, because this is your whole area of research and the focus of the book.
Absolutely. So
Big
I
question.
know it's a big question. Sorry.
So, cancer is a disease that develops for most people over a long course of time, over repetitive, and behaviors are so strongly linked to the development of cancers, especially those that are higher incidence cancers like colon cancer, which are primarily digestive risk factors, as well as lung cancer, which is going down but still tied very heavily to the behavioral risk factor of tobacco and nicotine and what we inhale. And other high incidence cancers like breast cancer and prostate cancer are also strongly linked to behavioral risk factors, even obesity itself being tied to that, and behavioral risk factors being tied to obesity, as well as other risk factors as well. So, over the course of repeated behaviors which are not healthy or not having the healthy behaviors, over the course of this repeated over years and years and years, decades and decades and decades, we develop mutations. We fail to correct those mutations, and those failure to correct those mutations in the body leads to the division of these mutated cells, which just continue dividing and turn into tumors and metastasize and ultimately cause cancer and kill quite a lot of people. That's been the kind of narrative that we have as the medical community been repeating over and over the course of the last 30, 40 years, certainly for that period of time. And before that with tobacco as well for a long period of time. What we have not done so well, I think, is tie what's upstream from the behaviors all the way down to the cancer. And what's upstream from the behaviors is our desire and inclination to do these behaviors that are not healthy, as well as what's preventing us from doing the healthier behaviors. And so my research deals a lot with the kinds of behaviors that are very much tied to mindset, things like addictions. And I talk about substance abuse disorders in the book, as well as I talk about it in my research. But those disorders are at a certain level, they're a certain degree of addiction. In the book, I use a more general conception of addiction to be something that is that's something that you're repeatedly seeking due to this involuntary, craving. So what I talk about in the book, and this is a long way of answering your question, sorry,
No, this is
but
great.
is that we really should be moving upstream as a public health community from the behaviors to the mindset that results in us repeating those behaviors so often. We have these cues, and we're giving into the cues very often. We have these subclinical addictive behaviors. We're eating a chocolate bar so often over the course of a year, decades and decades and decades, spiking our insulin over and over, preventing our ability to clear mutated cells, causing downstream mechanisms that cause mutated cells in the gut and other places of the body develop the cancer. We really need to be thinking about this from the very outset, from the cues that we get in our external environment and our adaptation to them, to the behaviors all the way down to cancer, which will lead to death. So this is a very central. And on the one hand, I'm not surprised that we haven't made all those connections because they're each individually so technical, from the neuroscientist doing the neuroscience to the oncologist looking at the cancer, the developed cancers themselves, to the stuff in the middle with the behaviors. They're each so technical, and there's a lot to do in the scientific community around each of them. So I'm not so surprised we haven't had people connect all those dots together. But at the same time, I think it's critical, and I wanted to do this myself. It's critical to connect all the dots because we're talking really about what we can do as individuals to not get fatal diseases.
And do you think that connecting those dots is so difficult because there are so many dots to connect? Is that the challenge here?
I think you get yes. And I think that because when you start getting fascinated with one of these, you go down a rabbit hole of
Sure.
so very much really interesting science, really interesting questions that you can answer about what's going on. Like, why do we feel cues so often? What can we do with the cues? I could talk about that for a whole day, right? And then not talk about cancer at all. And then I could
Sure.
also I do talk with my students for hours and hours about, these people have cancer. What kind of medications do they need to take in order to not get cancer? What kind of behaviors do they need to adopt? What kind of risk factors do they have? And I never talk about, cue signaling at all in that conversation. So you can get bogged down really quickly with any of these really fascinating topics. But again, for the lay public, I think that if you really want to avoid the fatal diseases, you have to think about the behaviors, and then you have to go upstream from that to think about what kind of mindset you need to adopt to not engage in those behaviors so often.
Yeah. A microcosm of this is this podcast and me now wanting to talk about 4,000 different topics.
I think we're just gonna have to move to San Diego, Kate, and enroll in one of these courses. Okay.
And go back to school. It sounds great to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Cuomo, with that information or with that insight and bringing it back to cravings, I think often, and Michael and I work in the fitness world, where there's a lot of like willpower talk, right? A lot of people think, okay, when I have a craving, my goal is to resist the craving. That's not the full picture. Can you give us a little more insight into why that's not necessarily the full picture? Why it's so exhausting to try to avoid a craving?
Yeah, avoiding the craving is difficult because we're engaging a system of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is a very highly developed part of the brain that basically allows us to understand the consequences of our actions, as well as have a number of other functions. And we're telling that part of the brain to counteract a very central part of the brain, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. That part of the brain that we control more consciously, the prefrontal cortex, slower, right? It's not quite as automatic as the craving. So we feel the craving. That's been reinforced over and over the course of our lives. And then to say, no, I'm not going to give into this, we have to feel the craving and then engage that part of our brain and say, no, I'm going to fight against this with this other part of my brain. And that can be exhausting, especially when you've reinforced it so often. And it stays pretty exhausting for a little while, for at least a few days, until you start really pulling yourself away from the strength of the craving. But as I'm sure we'll talk about, the brain is plastic. Our biology is adaptable. Once you start the process of pausing, which is one very important technique to break the craving, then you start to give less power to the craving. So pausing is a very important thing, and it helps helps us to better fight any future maladaptive cravings, and give more power to the prefrontal cortex to override the craving signal. So this is the willpower part, but this is not the whole picture. I think a very important technique that we can engage in is separating ourselves from the environmental cues that are going to trigger the craving. So again, the craving is very much cue signaling, and quite a lot of that is going to be the result of the external environment that we're in, right? We're surrounded by really great packaging for foods. We're surrounded by really dense foods, and they're all around us, right? So we go to the grocery store, we go in our kitchens, we go in to the workplace. Everywhere there's this dense food that looks fantastic, as well as other kinds of things I talk about in the book for, things like screens and so forth. And it can be very difficult to separate yourself from that, but trying to have some control of your external environment, trying to make those decisions way in advance of when you feel the craving, when you have to have that willpower, is going to be very important as well. And also not feeling so bad that you feel cravings in this really weird environment we've set up for ourselves in the modern world. Cravings are really, they're data points, right? They're something to tell you, how how you're feeling, how you're responding to the external environment. So trying to get an understanding of the cravings you feel, and yeah, you can try to fight against it, but really having not just that on your side, but also some sense of the external environment and how it's influencing you, I think will be important in trying to pull away from the craving and to get more control over your life.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And oftentimes when we go into one of our episodes, we basically say, actually, I think I say this every time I do one of my deep dives. Hey, we're going to give you information. We're going to talk about it so that we can be informed in the choices we make and not beat ourselves up so hard for having like normal human responses. And I think everything you said goes hand in hand with that. Like it's not a moral failure, like you've said in your book, to have a craving. It's the product of environment and these habit loops we've created and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about control. It's about information. Right. We want to be able to understand whether or not we have developed these subclinical addictions first, right? Understand that that's kind of what we're talking about. Understand if you've developed them, and then if you have, try to pull away from them. Don't feel bad that you've developed them. Pull away from them slowly, and then try to get more control. Just because you have a craving for things like coffee and sugar and things like that doesn't mean you can never have coffee and sugar. It means you start recognizing I have this kind of addictive behavior. Let me get some more control over my life. Only engage in these things when I decide that I think it's best, when I want to treat, when I want to do this for myself. Not be the subject of involuntary kind of fluctuations in your hormones or the external environment, right? So a lot of it is about having control over your own decision making.
This is fascinating. I'd love to kind of jump back to something you said a little bit earlier as well in relation to this. You spoke about kind of like drug addiction compared to like food addiction, which is probably something very different. There's been a very public story. I don't know if you're aware of it in the US. Kate wasn't over in Mexico. There's a well-known fitness professional here called Joe Wicks who went viral he posted a video that had a lot of problematic language around the way he was talking about food, but he was talking about how he had relapsed from sugar, quote, and had eaten a load of fruit and some Jaffa cakes or whatever it was. And I'm just kind of intrigued, like, how does the biology of food addiction differ between food or sugar compared to that of drugs or alcohol per se? Because a lot of the criticisms of him were that you can't really be addicted to sugar. It's not the same thing as being addicted to drugs. Could you just delve into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So substance abuse disorders are ones that are diagnosed because they are having some real psychological and other problems in our lives. So I've published some research recently, for example, in cannabis abuse disorder, and as well in other kinds of amphetamine abuse disorder and alcoholism and so forth. These diagnoses at a clinical level are made because not just a person consumes these and wants these, but they're having real psychological ramifications on a person's life. They're not able to focus, they're not able to interact socially. For example, these are some of the criteria that can be met. They're not able to interact socially normally with other human beings. They're not able to go work and do a job. They have legal problems. There are a number of possible very serious issues that occur when a person rises to the level of an abuse disorder. So a sugar addiction likely is not going to rise to the extreme level of a substance abuse disorder. That being said, the biology there are some similarities when it comes to the biology. So we still have cravings. In both scenarios, right? People can crave alcohol or cannabis or amphetamines or so forth, and they can give in to this, and it can be such a strong craving that is nearly impossible for people with these addictive behavior disorders to counteract through willpower. I mean, it's possible, but very difficult. And normally, and oftentimes take other kinds of external crutches like nicotine patches, for example, for people to try to step away from the substance that's causing such a big issue in their life. So while sugar addiction, if you want to call it that, sugar cravings have some of the same shared biology with the dopamine pathways, it's not going to usually rise to the extreme level of a use disorder where you're having these incredible negative ramifications on a person's life.
That's really fascinating. Thank you so much for that answer. So does that, sticking with the kind of eating behaviors and food addiction aspect then, so do early exposure through childhood as well? I know it's another topic me and Kate wanted to discuss there. How much does early exposure, like when you're a kid being rewarded with food, for example, and all these other kind of practices that parents might implement that they think are in the child's best interest, how does that kind of shape lifelong cravings?
Normalizes the cravings. It tells you so as adults we have been exposed to sugar as children, of course, and if it's something that we always get as children as a reward, if it's something we expect as children is just a normal thing that we can have, then as adults we're going to be very unlikely to step away from those cravings because we're going to see it as normal behavior. But sugar is something that is unhealthy, especially added sugar, right? We want to avoid added sugars. These spike insulin and they spike insulin growth factor. And as a result of that, we have these downstream mechanisms in the cell which increase proliferative signaling. And that proliferative signaling is going to result in cancer over time. So there's a lot of biology there, but the real problem I see with children being exposed to sugar so often is that they don't ever understand that there is another way to consume food, that there are other kinds of food that they should be eating instead. They see this as a reward behavior, as something you can have all the time, and don't really get to the appreciation that it's something that you should try to avoid if you want to be healthy.
Oh man. Toddler parent here. Actually, both of us.
We've both got toddlers, so wow.
We both have toddlers who are a month apart, and
Me
I don't
too,
know
I have a
about you.
3-year-old.
Oh,
You have
there we go.
yeah.
There we go.
And so the fight
I'm kind of
against
intrigued.
sugar every
Do you
day.
mind if I kind of just jump off script slightly here and just, because you're so informed around all these topics, do you find it now harder to navigate because you are so informed about how kind of all these different behaviors dictate outcomes?
So, so in my personal life, personally, I feel like I've benefited from having some understanding of this because I can make better choices around things like food and exercise and so forth. When it comes to things like my kids, that's a different story entirely, right? Yeah, the tantrums are really something else. I try not to reward any kind of behaviors with food, and I try not to punish by taking away food, but I cannot, when they're surrounded by friends who have snacks and stuff like that, just say, "Oh, you're not going to have any sugar."
Sure.
You have to choose kind of a middle ground and choose your battles, right? That's something certainly that I think as parents we can appreciate.
Yeah, I find it so tough to, think I don't want to instill food or guilt or shame around, or, guilt or shame around different food with my child. And also, you shouldn't be eating this much ice cream, kid. But we have this ice cream vendor who comes outside of our house every day at 4 and like honks his horn and goes, "Milo, I have your ice cream." And I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? This is a really interesting topic, and I love
it's a
that
tough
we're.
one.
Yeah.
It's so hard, and the tantrums, like you said. Okay, I want to kind of build off this topic and talk about coping and emotional eating and regulation. So we've talked a bit about the role of cravings in stress regulation. Like a lot of times we're going to these, we may be feeling these cravings. Correct me where I'm messing this up. We may be feeling these cravings because we're stressed. And then we eat them thinking, okay, if we're talking about food specifically, this will lower my stress, but that's not actually what happens, right?
Right. That's absolutely right. That's not going to lower your stress. So if you want to lower your stress, you want to do something like meditate or something that's actually proven to reduce cortisol. The food is just something you're putting on top of everything to try to fix the underlying issues. The underlying stressor is still going to be there. It's not always stress. Sometimes it is things like, social dynamics with colleagues and coworkers and so forth, that can be a cue that some underlying issue there, and you're eating to try to make yourself feel better, and that issue does not go away. So the underlying issue is not resolved by giving into the craving. There are oftentimes deeper issues. Sometimes it goes really deep and people need some help to resolve those deeper issues, some professional help. But sometimes, you can try to be mindful and practice mindfulness, which is a technique that I think that helps a lot with cravings and addiction, and try to figure out what it is that is going on in your life that is something you're trying to solve by eating the chocolate bar or having the alcohol and so forth.
So when we're talking about kind of that pause between the craving and action, we're talking about mindfulness. What can that look like? Like I think probably in an ideal world, you go have a few minutes to yourself to breathe. But what about in our fast-paced world where we're on the move and we don't have a lot of time?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that a distraction helps sometimes, trying to focus on something else. It is a lot about the timing and trying to take a certain amount of time without giving into the craving. So if I, feel stressed and I want that chocolate bar, I want it now. And it doesn't help that, I may be in an environment where the chocolate bar is right here. So ideally, you would have modified your environment such that you cannot get something unhealthy immediately, right? So if you do have it in your environment and you are, for whatever reason, inclined to resolve it quickly, by the time you get it, maybe you're like, no, you know what, I actually don't need it at all. I think I'll just have a glass of water instead. But even if it is in your environment, one thing that you can do is you can try to take a breath, and you can just do something else, right? Go play a game, perhaps. I wouldn't really advocate scrolling through social media as a way to resolve this because that can develop into a whole new kind of subclinical addiction. But doing something that is distracting for a few minutes and then trying to make a decision after that. So I think that trying to delay is really important when you're trying to pull away from a very strong kind of addictive behavior.
Right, we're breaking the pattern, I guess, right? And instead of feeding into it.
Exactly.
Okay, I really want to talk, and I want this to be kind of the main thing we talk about, how biology is adaptive, but I think we have to go back to the phone thing because I think Michael and I don't think, we were just talking about this, we both really struggle with being on our phones too much. And I've just actually, since reading your book, I've become so attuned to my mindless, like,
Same.
pick up, check
Yeah.
Instagram, actually for me, it's my email. I check my email like a crazy person.
Yeah, like just to defend us a little bit, Kate. It's work as well. Like so, we scroll it for social media
It
for
is.
work, and then but also we use it too much for non-work things as well.
So it's the same thing we're talking about with food, right? It's the same craving. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that this would be something that is a little bit less inbuilt than food, but yes, certainly it is the same kind of pathway that neurologically speaking. So when we're scrolling through social media and we see something interesting, we are experiencing something that is pleasurable. And it's a little bit like playing on a slot machine at a casino, right? You get something rewarding, you want to keep on going until you get it again. And then you get it and then it's variable reward. You get that reward again and you just keep on playing, try to get it in. So we keep on scrolling through social media over and over and over. One of the things that this can do is it can spike cortisol because we're not relaxed in that state. We're amped up, we're playing the game even though we're not recognizing it. We're trying to get something interesting to come up through on our social media feeds. And we think that if we keep on scrolling, keep on reading over and over and over in this cycle, we're going to eventually resolve the issue of this, even though we never do, and we keep on doing it, for a very long period of time. And in addition to that, on our screens, we have this additional issue that it late in the day will prevent us from getting high quality sleep. And this is very important. Sleep is essential for good health. It lets our bodies repair. It lets a lot of very beneficial activities go on for your brain, for your hormones, for virtually everything. Sleep is essential. And late in the day, late night scrolling is not going to help with that at all. So there are a number of reasons why reining in the screen usage would be beneficial. I, of course, use screens myself. I have to work. I answer emails, and I'm on my screen perhaps more than I should be as well. But you know, if I recognize, if I recognize that it's getting too much to do something else to try to pull away and try to moderate my behavior a little bit.
Yeah, when I was reading your book on a screen, by the way, I was literally like stroking my ego at one point when you were talking about sleep, because I'm very protective of my sleep. Like that's my top priority, even over my movement and nutrition in certain ways, because I know that when my sleep is really solid, it supports the other things. But I totally scroll before bed. And I don't want to, but when I wake up, like my phone's my first thing I go to, and it was this massive ego check, and one of those things I was like, Michael, what are you doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Um,
I
Michael,
refuse to look at
something.
my screen time. No. All I was going to say is, I guess it's back to what you said earlier as well, Dr. Cuomo, in terms of, I think people will probably struggle to be like, scrolling my phone can't increase my risk of cancer, right? Like if you just say that out loud, like it sounds a bit almost far-fetched. But then when you start kind of breaking it down and looking at the intricacies of all the things that it can have a knock-on impact for, like it feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's this cortisol signaling that's going to be something that over time is going to have some influence on your risk of cancer. Obviously not at the same level as something like tobacco smoking, but will still have some effect that is going to increase your risk for the development of these chronic diseases. And also the sleep. The sleep is essential. You gotta protect that if you want to decrease your risk of chronic diseases.
Boy, we have things to work on. But okay,
We've got homework.
good segue.
We're not the only ones.
Yeah.
It's everyone. This modern
Great.
environment of ours
Oh, totally.
is yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a segue into what I really want to hammer home here. This idea, and you touched on this earlier, but this is like the crux of your book. Our biology is adaptive. Like it's not fixed. We can change these patterns. We can change how we respond to cravings. So can you tell us, for the layman, what is neuroplasticity, and how does that help us essentially retrain these cravings?
There are a lot of different neuroplasticity mechanisms. I won't really get into the different ones, but basically the term refers to the changeability of the way your brain works. Okay. So for example, there are neurons that when one fires, it's next to the other one that will fire as well. Neurons that wire together, fire together is what we say in the neuroscience world. But that can change, right? That wiring can change. Two neurons next to each other don't need to be. You can break that and have neurons wired differently. So the wiring of the brain can change, one example. The strength of two neurons that wire together can change as well. So you can have one neuron fire and then the resulting neuron really light up and cause a whole bunch of different cascading effects on the other wiring that's going to happen. Or you can have a neuron fire and then have a less strong response as a result of that. And so these are kinds of connections in the brain which can weaken or strengthen. So not only can the connections change, but the connections can weaken or strengthen. When we give in to a craving, we are strengthening that kind of pathway. We're saying, hey, here's the mesolimbic dopamine pathway firing. As a result of this cue, we're going to give into it. Okay, now that craving becomes stronger. The cue is going to more strongly cause us to want whatever it is that the cue is associated with. When we start stepping away, even in small doses, just take a 1 minute pause and then you give into the craving. If you decide to do that, you dampen the strength of that pathway, right? Your neurons don't fire as strongly together, or maybe you have some change over time in the neurons that are connected with one another. And if you continue to take that pause, if you continue to, make that from 1 minute to 3 minutes, 3 minutes to 5 minutes, maybe you don't give in at all, or you are given less often to the craving. Eventually, it's not so much that, so you may have that cue, and that may not feel so strong at all. Like you may feel that stress. Instead of wanting a chocolate bar, you either don't want it at all, or the wanting of a chocolate bar is just so, it's like, okay, I guess I want it, but it's not a big deal. I don't have to have it. Very different than something like, oh, I really need this chocolate bar now to resolve this huge stressor I'm feeling. I really feel like I need it. So very different kind of signaling, even though the craving exists in both circumstances.
So how easily can you change those neuron pathways then? Like, is it quite a simple thing, or is it like a set period of time? Like, how easy? And is it harder as we age to change that? Like, what's the variability there?
Right. So I think that there is, as you know, a difference between things being simple and things being easy. So there are a lot of simple-ish techniques, like just waiting or trying to take some breaths or going out for a walk. Very simple. But that doesn't make it easy. It's
Mhm.
still a difficult thing to do, especially at the outset, right? And especially with some of these more, these disorders. We have people with nicotine addiction, very difficult. The techniques may be relatively easy. You just don't do it, or you go for a walk, but very psychologically difficult things to do. Even with food, that can be a difficult thing as well. You know, over the first time is very hard when you have a very strong craving, and it stays hard for a while, for a few days, 4 days, 5 days. It depends on the person. I usually advocate for at least, like if you're going to do a reset of some kind, try for at least like a week
Okay.
of not engaging in that behavior, and then see whether or not the craving is still there. But at least I would say, first 2 or 3 days are very difficult, and then it starts getting easier. So it can be very, very difficult. It depends on how strongly it's been reinforced in
Mhm.
that individual. And it also, of course, does depend on the substance we're talking about.
Wow, that's fascinating.
But that feels so much more promising than like 90 days do not engage in this
Yeah,
crate,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like just and I know it depends, like you said, but just thinking, okay, these first 2, 3 days are hardest and it will become easier, right? Because we're weakening that pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the longer kinds of adaptation, I think that that may be something more in the line of developing a good habit, learning a new good habit, like to get used to going to the gym every morning or something like that. That may take a little longer than a week.
Right.
But breaking a craving is probably a little stronger at the outset, but I think can be something that you make a lot more headway in a shorter period of time.
And you mentioned there about you can sometimes like remove those pathways, but is there always something there that increases your risk of it happening again if it's been there before in the past? Or is there a way to completely eradicate the craving of a thing?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer. I don't know if there's a lot of good research in this.
Okay.
I know that there are people, for example, that have been very overweight, obese, and they go on a diet and they become normal weight. You look at them a year later, or a few years later, a lot of them have become overweight again. Right? So is some evidence to suggest that I don't know if it's necessarily because these kinds of neurological pathways still exist, or because maybe they just went back to their old habits, because they thought they were done
Hmm.
eating healthy or whatever it may be. But there it may be a battle that we need to fight at some lower level for a longer period of time.
Hmm.
It can be very much more manageable once you break a craving. If you've not given into cravings for 6 months, a year, a lot more manageable to just not give into
Hmm.
them in the future. But the fact but the fact may be that they still exist at some very low level.
So fascinating. I love this. This is such a great topic.
So th- this this adaptive biology is, I mean, in your book, you talk a lot about healing, right? This is healing. And oh gosh, how do we do this quickly? What does this healing look like at a cellular level? Because you talk so much about that. I learned so much. I actually went to send my highlights, because I read this on a Kindle, to Michael, and I had like 100 and something highlights in your book. And I was like, oh, never mind. But can you is it possible to give a quick rundown of what healing looks like at a cellular level? And I would love for you to touch on inflammation, because I thought we would get to that earlier, but we didn't.
Yeah, chronic inflammation is extremely important. It's going to result in downstream mutations and our inability of our immune system to clear cells, which actually is a way of answering the other question as well. Bodies, our immune systems in particular, are very good at detecting mutated cells and breaking and trying to eradicate them from the body. At a certain point, a tumor gets so large and metastatic that we can't really rely on innate mechanisms to make that go away. But at very least, at lower levels, when we have a few mutated cells or a small number of them, our bodies are working naturally every single day to clear those mutated cells in all of us all the time. Like right now, my body's clearing mutated cells from my body because our bodies are constantly exposed to things in the external and internal environment that are going to have downstream effects, which are going to cause those mutations. And so our immune system, natural killer cells, and other cells are scanning constantly our body to see if we have any of those mutated cells, making them, killing them off, and then we create new cells, which hopefully don't have those mutations. So once you step away from the craving, you're letting your body do what it does to keep you healthy. If you continue to give in to these cravings very, very often, never give your body a break, never give your body a chance to rest, to repair, then we're never healing. We're just building upon the issues, the cellular issues that we have developed as a result of constantly engaging in these poor behaviors.
Okay. Well, I could ask 1,000 more questions,
Yeah.
but I think that is so helpful to end on. Like, you've taught us so much. How do we take this science and turn it into our everyday change?
Yeah, so the most important thing to start off with is, the book can help somebody with this, but the most important thing to start off with would be to recognize whether or not you have developed this kind of subclinical addiction, right? To foods, to screens, to whatever it is. It doesn't have to be any of the specific things I noted in the book, although I think what I've noted in the book are the very common ones that people do develop. And if you have developed them, then you recognize it, you try to figure out what kind of cues are causing those cravings to occur, and then you start slowly breaking away from them, slowly integrating the pause, maybe going a few days without them at a certain point if you can take that, and then maybe going 7 days, and then trying to be more deliberate about whether or not you engage in those behaviors. And that's going to reduce your risk for chronic diseases, including fatal diseases. Now, obviously, there's a lot that goes into the development of something like cancer or heart disease, but behaviors are so important. Good sleep, good diet, exercise can have such an immense impact on whether or not you develop these very debilitating, often fatal diseases. So it's really important to ascribe the appropriate high value to the behaviors that we engage in. And I think as a result of that, important to go upstream and think about your mindset. What is preventing you from engaging in good behaviors? What is promoting you engaging in poor behaviors? And to think about how to modify your external environment and your own techniques to be healthy. It is just so important to do those things.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cuomo. Oh, I mean, I think actually the takeaway is read Dr. Cuomo's book. It's fantastic. It's called Crave, The Hidden Biology of Addiction and Cancer. I already sent copies to my whole team, like all of my coaches. They started reading it. And like I said, everyone around me knows now that I highly recommend your book. I learned so much from it. I learned so much from you here today. So thank you so much for taking your time. I know you are a very busy person.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a fun conversation.